If you are a solopreneur, like many real estate entrepreneurs are, sometimes you can feel like there's not a lot to learn functionally from people who have created billion-dollar companies. For example, if you're in the process of hiring your first assistant, it's hard to hear about the systems and the processes and the strategies that someone like Steve Jobs implemented, and then think of ways that you can apply it to your own business. Now, in this discussion, we're going to talk about some of the strategies and key takeaways from those at the super elite level, but don't be deterred by that. There is so much to learn from those people who are able to succeed at the ultra high level, because when you start to scale, things that don't work start to break, meaning that the systems that work for those at the elite level, the multi-billion-dollar level, if you can apply that to your own business, especially if you're just getting started, it can really streamline your process. It can ensure that you're acting efficiently. It can expedite your growth trajectory. And that's all what we're going to talk about today. So in this episode, first we're going to talk about the 4 major areas that cause the vast majority of problems for entrepreneurs. And this is the case regardless of how far along on that growth trajectory you are. We're going to discuss some amazing books that our guests suggested, probably none of which you've read before, because I hadn't even heard of a lot of them, but I have a lot of faith that our guest knows what he's talking about in terms of book suggestions. And we're going to talk about how you can be the one person that everyone thinks about when specific phrases are mentioned. This is very, very powerful when it comes to branding. There is a ton of content in this episode, so I really can't wait to hear your reaction to it, and I can't wait to hear how this discussion impacts the way you think about scalability. Okay, you've heard me talk about it before, and now is actually the time. We are about 1 month away from the coolest, most educational, zero sales pitch real estate conference in the history of the world, the Intelligent Investors Real Estate Conference, IIREC. Now, why am I so confident that if you come to IIREC, you'll have a good time? There's a lot of reasons, but one of them is that last year we took a survey after the event, and here are some of the results. So first of all, 97% of the people that answered the survey said that their experience was either excellent or very good. And the remaining 3% of people said, quote, good. So that's a huge plus. That's a very good sign. Next, we asked a question which was structured like this. The question was, what did you dislike about the event? And then it was an open form document so that people could answer whatever they wanted. This allowed you to do something more creative and give responses that we wouldn't anticipate, as opposed to doing something like a multiple choice answer. So knowing that, what was the most common response? Nothing. I'm not joking. You probably know how much people like complaining about their experience at different events, and I totally get that, but maybe the attendees were just awesome people and they're just generally nice. Well, guess what? That's just another reason to come. So if you haven't already gotten your tickets, make sure to go to intelligentinvestors2020.com. Use the discount code ASYM for a $100 discount when you check out. Now, don't get it twisted though. We didn't just take those reviews and say, okay, look, we can just rest easy knowing that everyone had a good time last time. We ramped it up in every single way. So like I said, if you want to have an awesome experience, you want to learn a lot, if you want to learn from some of the best in the business, some of the people that I look up to the most, go to intelligentinvestors2020.com, use the discount code ASYM for $100 off, and I will see you there. All right, hope you enjoyed the episode. How's it going, everyone? Our guest for today is Verne Harnish, who is the founder of the world-renowned Entrepreneurs Organization, EO, with over 14,000 members worldwide. And for 15 years, he chaired EO's premier CEO program, the Birthing of Giants, which is held at MIT, a program which he still teaches today. He's the author of the bestseller Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, which has been translated into 9 languages, and along with the editors of Fortune, authored The Greatest Business Decisions of All Time, for which Jim Collins wrote the foreword. His latest book, Scaling Up Rockefeller Habits 2.0, has won 8 major international book awards, including the prestigious International Book Award for Best General Business Book. Verne, so honored to have you on. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hunter, glad to be on. Thanks for hosting me.
So for people that aren't familiar with your background, prior to jumping into this world, tell us a little bit about your background and how this path led you to the world of entrepreneurship and then entrepreneurship coaching.
Got it. So my grandparents, Hunter, both had their own companies. My grandmother was in the upholstery business. So she literally, rubbed all the way down to her fingers bled, reupholstering furniture. My grandfather had one of the first television repair businesses, if you can imagine, going way back, the advent of the TV. My dad then was a rocket engineer, and he and three of his buddies left Martin Marietta and started a company called Higher Electronics. And I had just been born, and so I kind of got to grow up with them scaling that business. And then he lost it all in the 73 recession. And I also saw what it's like to experience the downside. And so part of what reason I do this is I don't want to see any other entrepreneurs go through what my dad did. I then helped build a company while I was in college. We got to about 12 million in the HVAC business. And one of our board members, Hunter, was the late Fran Jabera. Fran had helped about 75 companies launch, including helped Bill Lear build Gates Learjet. And he took me under his wing and had me help him build the Center for Entrepreneurship at Wichita State University. And out of that, I launched ACE and then YEO. So that's a little bit of the background.
Yeah, it's excellent. So let's talk about actually your first book. When was the first book you wrote?
2002, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. And that was really the curriculum that I had developed for that MIT program. There's information on every street corner about how to start a company. 11,000 startups every hour in the world, 12,000 a day just in China. So, we're not hurting for new companies. And I have an MBA, which is supposed to help you run a big company, but there was really nothing out there on what it took to scale. And so I developed the curriculum over the first 10 years at that MIT program and then codified it in a book in 2002.
Excellent. So I definitely want to talk about some of the content of, scaling up, which is kind of the 2.0 of that first book. I'll ask it this way. You spent a ton of time learning some of these strategies yourself. You spent a lot of time going to business school. And then the way in which you write is extremely dense. And I say that as a compliment. I love reading books that are like textbooks where you can actually take them and then implement the strategies. What motivated you to really give away the playbook, especially since, I don't know if you saw yourself in the world of entrepreneurship coaching at the time, but like if you could teach someone what you're giving them, it should be a $50,000, $100,000, $2 million consulting job, which you just put into a book and gave it away. What are your thoughts on that? And what was the motivating factor for going to that level of detail in a book?
I experienced it myself. We scaled when I launched my company. Today it was called Scaling Up. We did $500,000, million, 2 million, 4 million, getting ready to do 8 million. So I'm doubling every year, going to be
yes.
And then boom, 9/11 hit. And I lost about $1 million in 10 weeks and have been dutifully losing money, which is what you're supposed to do in the late 90s as you were scaling. And overnight I was broke. It was like father, like son. And we were hosting our EO chapter, Robert Kiyosaki. And I always thought Robert was kind of a get rich quick guy, but I thought out of respect, I should read his book. And I was blown away, Hunter. First of all, excellent book, his cash flow game. I've played many times, even with my children, to talk about what it takes to get out of the rat race. And at the end, we could all debate whether he really had a rich dad or not. But he said, the true wealthy know that you have to give before you receive. And Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, I think is a good modern example of that. So, hey, life has treated me extremely well. And I think part of it is learning a lesson early on that my dad taught me back when I was in business with him in my teen years, that, it's important to give first before you take.
Yeah, that's actually really powerful. And obviously it's created something incredible for you and for a lot of people that have read the book, of course. So let's talk about, some of the content here. Before we jump into scaling and what this all means, why is this important? You mentioned that we don't have a shortage of new companies being founded every day. Why should people that are starting companies take this interview seriously?
Well, who needs to take it seriously are cities and countries. And that's why they're all beginning to say, hey, we got enough startups. We really need scale-ups because these are the unsung heroes of the global economy, Hunter. They're the ones that have really created all the innovations and all the jobs. I have one client, Mind, MYND, and they're literally disrupting the whole property management space. And that's the innovations that we need for the 21st century moving forward. So we are the ones that, for instance, the United States generated 90% of the net new jobs between the Great Recession and today, why the Fortune 500 been letting people go. So we're critical to the economy. Now, the reason I think people who have companies want to pay attention to this is, look, you're either scaling or you're dying. And it doesn't mean top line revenue, but I like to think you're either winning or you're learning. There is no failure. And those who have continued to learn the fastest are the ones that are remaining relevant. And that's the key. How do you make sure, with all the changes in technologies and industries, and for instance, what this company Mind is doing to disrupt property management, if you don't keep up, then your company and you aren't going to remain relevant. And that's what I think we all need to focus on.
You've had the opportunity to see a lot of different business models. You've probably had the opportunity to see a lot of people have incredible success and also some people that have struggled. And I don't want to use the term failure, as you just learned, but some extremely expensive learning experiences, I'd say. Before we even jump into some of the ways we correct some of those potential challenges, what are the most common areas where people struggle, where the real pain points can be for entrepreneurs in different levels of scale, when they're scaling?
Well, that's why I wrote the book, Mastering the Rockefeller Habits and Scaling Up, Hunter. And there, in the latest book, we said, all right, there's really 4 areas. And I wish business was this neatly organized, but it's not. But we looked at the people challenges, strategy, execution, and cash. And the good news is all 4, from deep research has been done, all 4 matter equally. It's like a 4-legged table. If one of those legs is weak, the thing's not going to be particularly stable. And so the areas that I think entrepreneurs struggle with are in those 4 categories.
I really like that. And actually, I've talked to some people that do consulting for Deloitte, and that's kind of the framework that they view this. I'm sure that this book has been influential, but if you can compartmentalize that into those 4 categories and then see, look, where is the pain point? Okay, it's one of these 4. Let's focus on that, as opposed to just, because every business, if you look at enough businesses, you'll start to see a lot of reoccurring themes. And that's one of the interesting things about having 14,000 members of EO is that you do get to see a lot of different companies. Now, one of the things that wasn't mentioned in those 4 is culture, or maybe it's the people, I guess would say. Culture is something that I have found talking with anyone that's had a lot of success in real estate. I'm talking about $500 million, $1 billion, $5 billion under management. The key team players play such a role. And if there are people sitting in the wrong seats, everything falls apart. What can you tell us about culture in terms of manifesting, creating a culture which does provide that true scalability?
Well, first, I would read Ben Horowitz's new book that just came out a few weeks ago. I don't know when this is going to air, but What You Do is Who You Are is the title of it. And he addresses this issue. He'd always been told as he scaled companies that you need a strong culture, but nobody really said how. And a lot of what he teaches aligns with what we're talking about in scaling up. And there are really 2, I think, very important components around one idea. And I like to use the analogy of a playground. So you've got a playground with some young children on it. It's bordered by a bunch of busy streets, and you're the one responsible for keeping these children safe. Now, if there aren't fences up, then these children are going to have no freedom. You're going to have them huddled in the center. You're going to have to watch them constantly. If one of them starts to wander off, you're going to have to pull them back. But interesting enough, if you put up fences, then the children can play right up to the edge. You don't hardly have to watch them. You're free now to go off and do other things. So what's interesting is that boundaries create freedom. And there are really 2 very important boundaries, and we like to relate it to sports teams. We really think companies ought to run more like professional sports teams than like families. And in all sport, there are 2 things. There are white lines, and it wouldn't be a sport if there weren't boundaries. And number 2, there's rules. It's one of the reasons why we have judges and referees, and every sport has these people running around and watching to see if somebody broke a rule. And that's what your values do in the company, is they set the rules. And hey, if somebody violates it the first time, they're going to get a yellow card, and you got to be willing to give them the red card, throw them out of the game, penalize them if they continue to violate it. And you've got to establish what are the white lines, the boundaries. And when your people have both, then they're free and you're free. And they're free to make decisions without you having to look over there and be around constantly. And so ultimately, you want to kind of create freedom for everyone in the organization. And the values and the 3 brand promises do just that.
Let's dive into that there. So when you say the white lines are creating the boundaries, can you give us some examples of like what that would entail?
So for instance, one of our clients is Fast Cat in the Philippines. They are a ferry service. I don't know if you guys know, but the Philippines has had the biggest ferry accidents in the world. Thousands of people have been killed. And so this shipping family came along and said, let's solve this problem for the people that live among these 7,000 islands, one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. And right on the side of the Fast Cat ferries, they painted the 3 promises. And by the way, you want to convince anyone, and it's a lesson for everyone listening to this, you want to convince anyone to do business with you versus somebody else. The godfather of influence, Robert Cialdini, said you want to give them 3 reasons. 3 is better than 2 or 4 or trumps a list of 10. And so they painted right on the side of the ferry, we promise to be first, ferry safe. And I'm literally saying the word ferry.
Right.
Ferry safe, ferry fast, and ferry convenient. And those are the 3 things that's right on the second banner of their website if you go to Fast Cat, this ferry service. And so it's these 3 brand promises that you're willing to make to the marketplace that you need everybody in your organization to commit to and deliver on. Those are the white lines of the organization.
Yeah, I really like that. And part of that is kind of coming up with your core values, coming up with things that you want to deliver to your clients and then outlining them. And what I really like of that is that they branded it, right? They made up a word, the very safe, very fast, very convenient. Again, Cameron Harrell is someone that I have a lot of respect for. I've been on the show a couple times. He always mentions like putting the cult in culture, right? And so when you start to either create a word or create your own language around certain things that you've branded, and people start to use that terminology, it does sink in a little bit better. And it means that anyone that they use that terminology ever in the future, they're referring to your company. And I think when you can hear other people even internally using that same language, you're like, okay, he's on board because he's using the language. What do you think about that?
Well, I want to separate out the 2, though. As I mentioned, the sports have many things in common with what we think businesses should have. But 2 of those is they have boundaries and rules. So the core values, and Fast Cat has a separate set of core values. Those are the rules that are more judgment calls, and like you have in sport. And then the brand promises, the 3 brand promises, create the boundaries. And the brand promises should be very measurable. The core values, again, are judgment calls. And back to Cameron Harrell's comment, that was actually one of Jim Collins. So Jim was the one who really said, hey, what he came to discover is that what makes for a strong culture is that it's cult-like. And he hated that he discovered that. And that was one of the real early surprises in his research. But it proved to be important if you wanted to have a strong culture.
Totally. And Jim College, big fan of his as well. I really like the idea of the judgment calls because that's when the freedom really comes into play, right? In the sense of it's an algorithm through which decisions should be made. It's a framework through which challenging decisions should be made. And once you establish that framework, then your team members are allowed to work within those boundaries. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And I don't want to conflate the 2 because I know you're kind of making the distinction there. But that actually makes it so that your team members can do things on their own without constantly referring back to you. And so that you're just not just delegating a specific task, but you're giving them an entire worldview and say, operate within this worldview.
Yeah, because, so for instance, our number 1 brand promise is that we're going to help our clients make more money. And by the way, that's very measurable. You can say whether you did that or not. And that's a white line. On the flip side, we have a core value, which is, honor intellectual capitalists. It's kind of a code word inside our own organization. And we can debate whether somebody's action violated that or not. But what's nice about it is that becomes the lightning rod, not the person. And in turn, if they made a decision, then you can go to them and say, hey, why did you make that decision? One of our core values is honor intellectual capitalists. how does that fit within it? And now you can have a robust conversation. And as you see, most sports don't change the white lines, but they do change the rules as they learn more, as things are updated, with all of the issues that are happening with American football, with head injuries, continual change in the rules there to protect people's heads. So that can change, but the boundaries typically don't.
Let me ask you something. How does technology play a role in the conversation with scalability and scaling? Obviously, this is something that's constantly changing, but what's your view, just generally speaking, on the implementation, integration of technology with companies? And at what point do you say, I think what's lacking here is a technological tool that you guys need to implement? It's worth the cost, for example.
Yeah, well, really two things. First, you need to make sure that you figured out your business model. Otherwise, you're just going to automate a mess and you're just going to speed up the problems. And so it's why it really aligns with the third phase, which is execution. So you want to get the right people in the right butts. As Jim Collins said, we created a list of what those seats ought to be in a company called our function accountability chart and our process accountability chart. Then you want to nail your strategy. And only then, in order to really help with execution, do you want to apply technology? And that's where its role is properly. And Jim Collins even suggested that in his book, Good to Great, that you don't want to apply capital or technology until the business model's been nailed. And then you want to use both of those to scale. And it was part of the mistake I made. When I was scaling for $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, $4 million, $8 million, I was inappropriately applying cash to what proved to be a broken business model. I was scaling because everybody was scaling there towards the end of the 90s. And when things blew up, that's when weak business models get exposed. And so you want to apply technology at the end. The other place you want to apply technology is wherever there's drama, because that's our basic rule around where you've got execution issues, is where there's drama. A deadline was missed, something was misshipped, there was a quality issue. And what's great is technology can really help drive process improvement, which is really what you need to look for when you've got drama.
Interesting. Do you have any technological solutions that maybe are a little bit, not necessarily niche, but a little bit more general in nature that you've really found recently to really help you or your entrepreneurs you coach?
Well, this is why we created what we call Scaling Up Scoreboard, Hunter. The CF, early on, when you first start a company, you get a bookkeeping system. Most people use QuickBooks in the beginning. Everybody needs some kind of a CRM system. We were Infusionsoft, now HubSpot. And everyone needs some kind of an operating system. And usually it's specific to the industry. But what's the tool for the CEO, for the owner, to keep track of priorities and KPIs? And so we created a very simple and inexpensive tool called Scoreboard. And just like in professional sports teams, it's amazing. You watch any match that's going on real time off your mobile device or online, and you're updated. I'm a big tennis fan. I know how many aces and errors have been made every moment. Yet we don't typically have that same visibility into our own organization. And that's why we built Scoreboard, to do that.
Interesting. Okay. I'll check that tool out. I haven't been familiarized with that yet, but it's something that there's a great ways to spend money, and technology is a very good one. So I'll kind of leave it at that. Speaking of great ways to spend money, there has been a real change in the world of marketing. The advent and popularization of the alternative media, the podcast medium in particular, has really changed the face of marketing to a large degree, and to a certain degree sales as well as kind of social media stuff as well. And there's a little bit of a symbiosis there. What are your thoughts on the current state of where entrepreneurs should be focusing their efforts in terms of marketing? Where are you seeing the biggest bang for their buck in terms of attracting the right clients, which results in the cash register ringing?
Yeah. The short answer is, Hunter, create and build brand. Because if you've got brand, then your marketing costs go down and your pricing power goes up. And that translates into gross margin. And we think the growth of gross margin dollars is more important than revenue growth or even profitability, because that tells you've got something a lot of people want and they're willing to pay for it. And you notice the biggest brands don't have big marketing budgets and advertising budgets. and they've got strong pricing power. So how does a solo entrepreneur or a smaller company do that? It's through hyper focus. And that's why it's critical to really decide who your core, juicy, red core customer is. I think of Arnie Malham with CJ Advertising. There's, an advertising firm on every corner, like there is somebody managing and building a real estate empire and starting a company. But Arnie said, look, I'm only going to do advertising for law firms. No, personal injury law firms. No, only personal injury law firms in an NFL city, a city big enough for an NFL team. So there was a sophistication in billboarding and radio advertising. No, he said, I only want to work for one personal injury law firm per NFL city. And then I'm going to make him a promise. I'm going to make him number one in that market. And by the way, he was able to do it. And when you have that kind of results with that narrow of a market, customers sought him out. He was able to say no, like Southwest Airlines does to cities. Then he was able to say yes. He was as picky at choosing the customer as the customer was him. And so his marketing costs were nil. And what he could charge because of the results that he got was huge. And as a result, he had tremendous gross margins versus your typical ad agency, of which there's 100,000 solopreneurs just in the United States doing that.
Yeah, I really like that, especially kind of tying it back into kind of the solopreneur world. When you get started creating content, for example, for your website, your platform, whatever it is, sometimes you can be a little bit unsure as to what your particular niche is. But it's really important that you find that niche, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be only going to be first-time pets for firemen or something like that, like super, super niche down like that. But you cannot be everything to everyone. You need to establish something so that whenever anyone brings up one particular topic, they know you're that person. At least in their mind, you're that person. Our podcast, we tend to have really high profile guests on. We tend to talk about economics a lot. We get into the details a lot. That's what this brand is. There's other people where their whole brand is about financial freedom. For Verne, it's all about coaching entrepreneurs and the entrepreneur organization. Anytime anyone mentions scaling at all, that person's name is going to be in the conversation. And I really like that because that's when you actually create marketing, which is efficient because it's other people doing it for you, right? They're having those conversations for you. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So what you're highlighting is that brand then really comes down to something very simple, owning a word or two in the minds of enough people. So when I say deliver pizza, and I've asked that question in 6 continents, almost everyone except folks in Southeast Asia say Domino's. Nobody could own the word pizza. But if I needed pizza delivered, it was Domino's. And that made Tom Monahan $4 billion owning that. So we've decided, it's why we even changed the name of our company, Hunter. It was Gazelles for all of these 20 years. And we've pivoted to the word scaling up. It's the title of the book. It's easy to spell. And we want to own 2 words around the globe. To your point, anyone's talking about scaling up or scale ups, they're going to come to our firm and they're going to think about us. And I happen to own scalingup.com and scaleups.com, which is our new media site for everything scale-ups. And that's what you want to do in whatever field, because you ultimately want the media and everyone else around to say, he or she is the king of, queen of, or godfather of, and then you fill in the blank.
I really like that. Even your competitors will do that, by the way, because when someone brings that name, they can't help but say, oh my gosh, well, this is clearly Verne's thing. And they have to send you that business, which is absolutely super, super powerful. One of the reasons I love real estate is that you're able to create a very lean and mean team, which can accomplish some pretty remarkable things. I really like staying away from bureaucracy and the multi-tiered levels of a lot of companies, reaching out to HR, reaching out to the VP of this, that, and the other thing. It's a complete nightmare to me, at least from the stories that I hear for people that are in those situations. No offense to those that are, but I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about if you are. When you look at a firm, how do you identify whether or not there's too much, quote, infrastructure, whether or not there's too much bureaucracy? Like, what do you go through to say, I think this is actually causing more problems than it's helping?
Well, it's a very complex question. I mean, we are we see that there's a whole new organizational structure that is being pioneered here for the 21st century. And it really comes down to something very fundamental, Hunter. For the last gazillion years, we've been organizing muscle, our backs, in order to go to war and to build automobiles and manufacturing plants. And as such, we built org charts that were form and function matched. If you think about the traditional org chart, it looks like the human skeleton, which is one of the most efficient ways to organize muscle, to either do the beautiful work of a Picasso with fine motor skills, or you're going to go build the Great Wall of China. There's the head, shoulders, arms, fingers, and toes. Now we're doing brain work, and it makes no sense to use a back-structured organization chart to do brain work. We've moved from the muscle to the mind. So we look more like an ant colony or a beehive. And if you think about it, there's no vice presidents, there's no managers, there's no middle management, there's the queen, and I think it's significant it's a queen, not a king, and then all of the workers. And then the workers, who, by the way, are divided into specialties, communicate with each other, and they learn, as research has found, we learn more from our peers. We will work harder for our peers than we will our boss. And so for the last 50 years, Gallup is measuring engagement scores, and it's been 19% engagement for 50 years. Why? There's 12,000 new leadership books written every year. So I maintain that most of these leadership books aren't worth the paper they're printed on. At the end of the day, we know that people quit their boss. And rather than try to fix the boss, our goal is to get rid of the boss. Nobody needs managed in the 21st century. They need a coach, which is, again, perfect analogy to professional sports teams, but they don't need a manager. Your phone can manage and do most of what bosses used to do just even 10 years ago.
Explain what you mean by that. I'm very interested. What do you mean when you say your phone can do what most bosses used to do?
Well, one thing you want to go to your boss to is you have a question, you need to find an answer. Well, right now, if anyone has any kind of illness, where's the first place they go? Dr. Google. They don't even go to an expert like their doctor. And Dr. Google, now the research is clear, is much more accurate in diagnosing what your issue is than your doctor is. The Stanford doctors almost killed a good buddy of mine's daughter. And if he hadn't been on Dr. Google, figuring out that her symptoms showed that she had meningitis, something the Stanford doctors were overlooking, she'd be dead today. So I don't need a boss to tell me how to do anything. What do? I go to YouTube and figure out how I'm going to patch this hole I've got, on a wall properly. And so the smart organizations, and that's why one of our, big fans, and I'm a fan of his as well, is Scott and Mike at Atlassian. They were sitting in my workshop at 50 employees in 2005. Today, they have 3,500 employees and almost a $30 billion market cap. And they have built the technologies that allow companies to create and house this common intellectual capital. You don't want any employee in your organization to be hoarding information, because if they get hit by a bus, your organization's in trouble. And so you need people to create videos and put the knowledge and information they've got up so that we can collectively, like we can all go to Wikipedia and get any answer we need to any question updated to the minute, including Aramco going public this week and hitting first company to hit $2 trillion in market cap. That information's updated by the minute. And I don't need to go to a boss to get those answers. And then what does our phone do? My phone leads my Tabata exercise routine. It wakes me up. Through my Muse 2, it helps even drive my meditation practices. And so a lot of what I needed a person to help me with, now my phone can do. And so the role really of the leader has changed from telling to coaching, from bossing to coaching.
I really like that. And that kind of is a good segue to a topic I wanted to talk to you about. I think that there's a lot of people listening to this who are entrepreneurs, who are solopreneurs, who are founders and CEOs, whether it be a solopreneur company or even large companies with 15, 16 employees or 100. Even if you're small, though, even if you're a small team, even if it's just you need to be positioning yourself as a leader, both to your peers and to yourself. And so I wanted to hear from your perspective, what are some of the strategies that people can implement to become better leaders, even if it's just themselves, convincing themselves that they are a leader, that they need to position themselves in such a way that their peers, look up to them in terms of the leadership of their own company?
Well, there's two. One is, I think, commit to continuous learning. Whether it's Bill Gates' Think Weeks, Mark Cuban, who reads 3 hours every day since he was 20, Warren Buffett, really the key to his being the investor success is he's scanning 50 newspapers every day to get a sense of what the patterns and trends are. It's this commitment to continuous learning. And the minute you stop learning, it's over. The second one is this willingness to give first, that we already talked about, or to care. I mean, if you were to boil leadership down to one word, it's the word care. And there's no way you're going to get anyone else to care for you and your business and your company and your customers if you don't show that you care for them first. And so I think the only leadership book really worth reading is this IMD professor, George Kohlreiser's book called Care to Dare. And so I'd encourage folks to take a look at it. And then ultimately, by continuing to learn and care about taking care of people, then you're going to have to make some decisions. And ultimately, leadership comes down to decision making. And that's why you're paid the median bucks. After you've listened to your employees, you listen to the marketplace, they might all be saying, go right. And you can say, hey, I've heard you, but we're going left. And that's what makes for entrepreneurs is we often go in a different direction than everyone else.
Yeah.
Often at our peril. And that's why there's a lot of arrows in the backs of entrepreneurs.
That's right. And I appreciate you sharing that resource there, Care to Dare, which I have not heard of before. So I'll definitely check that out. You obviously have positioned yourself to help people that are in the process of scaling, process of growing, but also for relatively new entrepreneurs. I am confident, just knowing what it takes to make a financial commitment in some sort of coaching, you probably have a lot of people that have come there that are on the brink of some amazing successes. And I'm sure you've seen some remarkable outcomes, but I'm sure you've also seen some pretty profound horror stories, especially when people come seeking help. Many times people can be close to rock bottom. What can you share about those that came to you kind of in that state of like, my life is kind of falling apart, I need your help? And what can we learn from those stories and potentially avoid some of those challenges?
Well, you'd warned me that question was coming. Most folks don't want their negative stories spread out all over the place. And at the beginning of our CEO boot camp, of which we did one last week, we always start by saying, hey, we're only going to tell you all the good stuff. And you could end up with an inferiority complex thinking, oh my gosh, I'm not that good. But look, all of them have failed along the way. But I was thinking about Dr. Chip Mock. Chip was this solopreneur doctor who did extremely well, but he couldn't scale, because a lot of folks that are particularly in the professional services field, the business is them, whether they're a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or, managing, with a portfolio of real estate. And the key thing you've got to teach them is how to delegate. And it sounds simple, but I never took a course on delegation in my MBA. And that's what we taught Chip. And he went through our scaling up. He's our first 4-time attendee at our CEO boot camp. And since then, he's been able to scale in just the last 24 months to over 30 locations. And the key, and everybody can see his video up on our ceobootcamp.com kind of website.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, it's very good to hear. There's I'm sure many, many stories that we'll keep private. So anyway, I appreciate you kind of sharing that.
Well, and the key is, see, a lot of folks don't understand delegation. They what they really do is abdicate. Here, you do it. But the analogy that I use is a thermostat. Again, I got my start in the HVAC business, and we all have a heating air conditioning system in our office or our home. And without a thermostat, the system would go out of control. You would waste a lot of energy. People would be uncomfortable. But there's this device, and it does two things. One, it lets you set a goal. Hey, I want it to be 70 degrees. And number two, it's constantly monitoring and giving feedback. And what's cool is today we've got things like the Nest that allow us to run it remotely off of our phone. And it involves machine learning. So it starts to get smart and makes decisions on its own. And that's how technology is being leveraged, even in something as simple as a thermostat. But that's the simple thing you need to put in place. And that's what Rockefeller Habits do, is helps install, if you would, thermostats all over the organization so that the entrepreneur can relax and know that things are under control. And that's why 76% of companies, it's only the entrepreneur is the sole employee. And I like to kid that many of those companies are overstaffed. And it's because most entrepreneurs don't trust that anyone else can run or do anything in the business as good as they can. And until you're willing to let that go and bring other people in to help you, even if it's just outsourced, you're going to get stuck and it's going to be hard to scale.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that there's levels to delegation, right? There's actually saying, okay, look, do this task, and you say the task, and then the person that you're delegating to constantly comes back to you with different questions and says, how do we do this? How do we navigate this challenge? And it's just a never-ending battle of communication. And then, on the higher end of the level, you say, look, not only here is this task, but here's the framework in which to make those decisions. And then the next level is, in the future, if you can identify a potential opportunity, just go ahead and take that action and let me know when it's done. And
that's why I love, Marshall Goldsmith nailed, I think, the title of one of the best books. And that is, what got you here won't get you there. So what entrepreneurs need to realize is what they did in the beginning. If they keep doing it, that's what's going to kill them. So for instance, in the beginning, you say yes to everything. You don't know what you're good at. You're going to try lots of things. And it's only at some point that you decide, all right, now I need to start saying no. In the beginning, you've got to make a lot of decisions. Later on, if somebody comes to you, the worst thing you can do is give them a decision, because they're going to keep coming to you. In the beginning, you had a lot of answers. But once you cross that chasm and you begin to scale, now it's really about having a better question. And so it's one of the things that we take entrepreneurs through, CEOs through, in our boot camp is, how do we get you to make sure you've made that transition? And that's what we had to do with Dr. Chip Mock, from what you had to do in the early days to get started and what you have to do now in order to scale. And by the way, a little simple one, and Jeffrey Moore pointed this out, the early customers you had. If you continue to have their testimonials on your website, it's going to kill you, because they were weird because you were weird. No one's going to do business with, a startup unless they're a little bit weird. And if they're still your testimonials on your website, it's going to turn off now the bigger customers and opportunities that you're going after. So I'm telling you, what got you here will crush you if you don't make the changes.
I really like that little tip about the testimonials. That's something that can easily be implemented, and I couldn't agree more. If you're still using your cousin who made their first investment with you, it's time to step up. If it's been in the business for quite some time and have attracted some high caliber investors in particular.
Exactly.
So you talked about kind of a potential super challenging situation that resulted in a big win. You had the opportunity to help a lot of high performers or ultra high performers in the world of entrepreneurship. What are some of the stories or individuals that you've really gotten a lot of inspiration from?
I think it was the early guys. Obviously, it was Steve Jobs. Steve is the reason that I launched YEO, which is EO today. I had a chance to host his first public speech after being fired from Apple, and we did this thing called the ACE 100. And I remember 1986, Bonaventure Hotel. We had about 1,200 young entrepreneurs in the audience. And I had Steve sitting up front, and next to him was Michael Dell and Mark Cuban and Kevin Harrington, the infomercial king, and Neil Balter had founded California Closets. And his speech that he gave that evening, I can still recall almost, word for word. But we then threw a party that night, and he was standing in the corner and alone, really. And I realized that there needed to be an organization for the Steves of the world. And that's when that night I conceived the idea for YEO, which today is EO. And clearly a lot of what Steve did, both wrong and right, we've studied, have inside knowledge on some of it, and have made sure that we've taught that to folks who are trying to scale. I got to know Michael Dell his second year in business, and he was kind enough to come to our events each year in those early years. Later on, he asked me to coach his son when his son launched a business. But, I never coached Michael. Michael, I learned more from him and Tom Meredith. Tom was the guy that the board brought in to really teach Michael how to scale a business when he had run out of cash and almost blew up the company. And Tom remains a good friend today. And so those are a couple of many that have been, direct inspirations of what it is now that we teach other companies.
Yeah, that is really incredible and really powerful. So I appreciate you sharing that. That's
Yeah. By the way, a little simple thing. I remember. So Michael was kind enough to let us do tours, bring entrepreneurs in and tour, the Dell facilities and see how they ran their daily huddles and they ran their factories. And I remember seeing, and Michael's so disciplined. Next to every meeting room was a poster, and it said, "Here are the 6 rules for running an effective meeting." And I love that kind of detail that he would get into. And rule number 6 is at the end of the meeting, make sure you summarize who said they're going to do what, when. And that be created what today is our who, what, when tool among many one-page tools that we teach entrepreneurs to use.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, definitely looking forward to checking out some of those tools. Before we jump off, I want you to have the opportunity to share with listeners how they can learn more about your book and your programs and other ways to learn more about you and your company.
Well, they can go to scalingup.com. So we've kept it simple. And in the opening banner, they're going to see a picture of the book, Scaling Up. And next to it, Hunter, are some free resources. So there's a link to our growth tools, the ones I was just mentioning. And they're in 17 different languages. They're free to download forever. As you said, we give away most of all of our IP to help people out there in the marketplace. Number 2, there's a couple of free chapters they can download. One called The Barriers, which we encourage you to take a look at, the 3 barriers to scaling. You don't have to buy a copy of the book, just download it. And there's a bonus chapter. This is a good time of the year. How to run a strategic planning session, even if it's just with yourself. And so those are free resources that can be downloaded. And so I'd encourage you to go to scalingup.com to get started.
Awesome. We'll link to that in the show notes page. Verne, can't thank you enough. Really appreciate it.
You got it, Hunter. Thank you for all you're doing for people out there as well.
All right, listeners, thanks for checking out the episode. As always, the contact information for our guest will be available in the show notes page, which is hosted on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. Don't forget, if you want access to some of the free goodies that I'm talking about at the beginning of these episodes, like free ebooks, weekly investor emails, and articles about some of the most important investment-related topics, make sure that you have created an account with CFC because this stuff is automatically available. You can do this by going to cashflowconnections.com and signing up as an accredited investor. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at hunterthompson@cashflowconnections.com. Thanks again.